angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology. Conspiracy. Discovery. Special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV. Special Investigative Report.
There's a piece of verse that goes something like this. By the pricking in my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. And that seems to be true. The question we'll ask tonight is, what do the Native Americans seem to know about this something wicked coming this way? Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert, our guest today, part of an investigative team that went out with Tom Horn to do research for the forthcoming book co-written by Tom and Chris Putnam, On the Path of the Immortals. It is our pleasure to welcome to the Skywatch TV studios investigators Allie Anderson and Carl Olofsson.
Hello.
Welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you for having us.
The area that you went to research with Tom, where was it specifically?
The Four Corners area, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. And it's the hub of the Navajo Nation. It's actually where they have their capital, where they hold their legislation.
Okay. Now, why specifically that part of the country?
Why not? It's the best part to go to. We learned in the Exo Vaticana series that sometimes it's good to get out from behind the screen and go to the source for the knowledge. You can only read about so much, and only so much gets released. When you actually go to the source, see the people, see the actual sites, and learn firsthand what is there, what wasn't there, it really tells a much, much more complete story than what we get out of the books that we're allowed to be allowed to read and see.
So specifically, what type of information were you trying to dig up during the research?
Lots of information, but it came down to we were seeing parallels between biblical history and the oral tradition given by the native Navajos. Just in the oral tradition that we read and learned about before we went on that trip, there was giants, there was six-fingered giants, there was cannibalism, there was a flood. The parallels, there was too many parallels for this to be just written off. There's something there, and we needed to dig a little deeper, and that's why we go to the source. So we went to the Four Corners areas to get interviews, but also see the sites, see the petroglyphs, get firsthand knowledge of what was occurring there. And that trip took a totally different direction than we previously anticipated.
How so?
Originally, I happened to be working with a missionary who had worked in the area. And we were working on a concrete job together, and men do as men do, and you talk. But with being Skywatch personnel, and I've got a missionary who'd worked in the field there, we got into talking about stargates, gods, the oral traditions. And one of the things that came out was he had stated that they had an oral tradition and that's what had happened, is we talked about Mount Graham being a sacred site. And he'd said, yeah, they have an oral tradition of the gods coming down onto the mountains. And it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. So we start talking back and forth.
Very similar to the story from the book of Enoch about the Watchers descending on Mount Hermon.
Oh, yeah. And so I talked with him more about it, and he said, hey, if you want, I could put you in contact with one of the tribal elders who happened to be, used to be one of the code talkers, and he's now a converted Christian, and I'm sure he'd talk with you. And it's like, how do you not follow that up? I mean, this is a dead ringer. I've got the perfect in. So I start setting that up. This should be a no-brainer, knock it out of the park, 2-3 calls, no problem. And I called, and I could not nail down this interview. It just was not happening. But by then, I'd spoken with Tom about it. He was chomping at the bit. Everything was ready. Everything was a go. I just had to nail down this interview, and I could not do it. So it went from trying to get tribal elders to I started speaking with college professors. And so I'm trying to get a college professor to get me an interview. I've got their times that they're available. And one of them comes back with just this cryptic message of, if you want to speak with us, you need to find out what your people have done to my people. And I'm like, okay. And he just left it at that. So I did research on it, and then I found out that the U.S. government had awarded them $554 million in settlement. And so all the tribal elders, it really is, they have political offices. I mean, their meetings just look like, you're watching Congress on television, and they're in delegation. So that just wasn't going to pan out. I never did get a word back from the professor of the Diné College. So it's like, I'm pulling at threads here. And so I nailed down an interview with Miss Navajo Nation, which is kind of like Miss America, except they really have to butcher a sheep and stuff like this. It's 3 days of competition where they have to tell the oral tradition stories in the Diné language. They have to, butcher a sheep. They have to do the dances. And then in the end, the woman who wins actually becomes the cultural representative for the Navajo Nation. So I was like, okay, this will work. And she was going to tell us, their oral history, to us in both Diné and in English. So we drive all the way across the country, get over there, and at like 8:52 the night before, we get a cancellation for the interview. And I was like, what? And it was interesting. As a backup, I had seen a book by an author on the Navajo Nation named Don Mose Jr., and he'd written this fantastic book where you read their oral tradition in English, and he had the artwork done by his one of his students, Charles Yanito. And once you finish the book in English, you flip it over, and you can read the whole book, pictures and illustrations and everything, in Navajo. So we're on the road, and we're traveling from place to place, already hitting the sites that we'd already booked. And I'm trying to nail down an interview. And so I called Don Mose, and I actually got the Navajo Cultural Center was his contact. And I contacted them. He called me, boom, right away. And he says, yeah, I'll give you guys an interview. So that cancellation of the big interview I had, I ended up turning into the best interview of the trip. I mean, it was just off the charts.
Now, we'll talk about that in a little more depth here in a couple of minutes. We'll keep people stringing along here as we get into the interview. But I want to talk to you, Allie. I understand you're pursuing a license as a private investigator.
Yes. When I was a little girl, I played spy girl and read the Nancy Drew stories and did all of that. As I got older, I pursued other things and went about my life. And then through a series of events that I couldn't have orchestrated on my own, I found myself in a place where I was given an opportunity to go back to school and obtain my certification to become an investigator. And I'm currently working on getting my license in Missouri.
So that's going to help in your role as an investigator for some of these special reports that we'll be producing for Skywatch TV.
Sure. I've actually recently pulled some documentation on some excavations that have been happening from the 70s up to now that will come into play as we look into more of some of the evidence about the Anasazi. And it's been quite interesting to read about, and finding some of that documentation and things like that, learning about how to go about that.
So, the one field work is one thing where you're going out and you're taking pictures on site and stuff, but your work then would be involved in doing some digging into historical records, land records, historical accounts and things like that?
Yeah, some of the documentation and things like that. The internet is a great tool, but sometimes as you go into it, you're reading articles other people have written, and sometimes it's good to dig deeper, find that initial documentation. Sometimes the numbers are different, or things can come up differently. So I'm in the process of looking into all of that right now too. So that's been fun to do.
And sometimes what people tell you when you actually dig into the documentation turns out perhaps not to be quite as accurate as they would have you believe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What were some of the surprising things that you have been finding as you've been digging into the documentation? Anything that really surprised you or jumped out, or just that you thought was really intriguing? Some potential new leads for investigations?
It's interesting because face-to-face, people do warm up and they tell you things they don't want to say officially online, things like that. In the beginning, we were told that the word Anasazi meant ancient ones. And then we heard ancient enemy. As we asked about that, we heard ancient alien enemy. Some people said, oh, that just means that it was people that came from somewhere else. Some people said it meant something entirely different. So that was an interesting thing to go in person and talk to people and find that the story can change when you're face-to-face with someone as they warm up to you and decide to disclose a little more. And in the documentation that I found, looking into the Anasazi, finding that the reasons that they say they evacuated some of those reasons become questionable, and new things surface that make you really question the reasons that are given in the first place, which are some of the things I've been reading about. So
where do you dig for documentation and information like that? I mean, again, the internet is a great thing, but for me, if it goes much beyond Wikipedia, I start struggling. Where do you look for? What kind of sources might an investigator use to try to pull out the real truth?
There are lots of sources. It's too much to try to list here and now.
And besides, you'd have to kill us if you told us. So.
Exactly, exactly. But, county records, public records, things like that.
So the work of a private investigator is not so much car chases and gunplay, it's digging through records and sifting through information.
Yeah, you have to like the library a lot. It's much less guns and shoot 'em outs and a lot more just sitting in the library. It's much quieter than it's represented to be on TV.
Well, we want to talk to you about your library, and of course that's the point of this discussion of the forthcoming book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam's latest, their follow-up to Exo Vaticana and Petrus Romanus, the final pope is here. We're going to show you a little tease of what Carl and Allie and Tom Horn, Chris Putnam discovered as they were researching the book right now.
Now we're on our way to the petroglyphs. There are some strange images that are there.
Yeah. I saw it with the naked eye. Yeah. Did you see it? The orb. I saw an orb with the naked eye.
What is that?
In 2012, they shocked the world when they predicted Pope Benedict's resignation 1 year in advance. In 2013, they uncovered the mysteries of Mount Graham, the Lucifer device, and the Vatican's secret plan for the arrival of an alien savior. For the last 24 months, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam have been working behind the scenes on their most guarded project and greatest discovery yet. Mount Graham in Arizona is said to be a portal, and the Jesuits admit they are monitoring something there that is approaching the Earth. But as the Vatican knows and the authors just uncovered, this mountain is not the only gateway to another dimension. Now, in their new book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam set out with cameras and field investigators to document the most astonishing evidence of those behind the veil. Armed with inside intelligence from the native peoples, they unearth chilling evidence of what the Bible says about sacred locations and the giant beings that await their time from within.
They claimed that they could actually conjure light ships down, UFOs, aliens.
So what would have caused these ancient Pueblo Anasazi Indians to have departed this area with such great haste?
We don't know why they never finished completion of the Sun Temple.
Many of them escaped right through some of these mountains, some of these old Anasazi ruins.
Travel with internationally acclaimed investigative authors of Petrus Romanus and Exo Vaticana to learn the truth behind a secret so fantastic that it took 2 years and thousands of miles of research to document what has been kept hidden from the public by elitists and intellectuals who are planning mankind's assimilation under a coming savior.
Here's the six-toed giant our Indian guide told us about. And there's the fallen reptilian with the halo above his head that came through the portal.
One whom the prophet Daniel foresaw as an alien god. On the Path of the Immortals.
We're talking about the book On the Path of the Immortals, the new release from Tom Horn and Chris Putnam, and discussing the background, the backstory, if you will, behind the book, the research that went into the book from the people that did the heavy lifting, Carl Olofsson and Allie Anderson, investigators who will be doing some special projects with Skywatch TV as we go forward and bring you further special investigations. In other words, something a little more than just a book release, but to try to go a little deeper, get out into the field and find some additional information. Carl, you were telling us before about the interview with the author Don Mose Jr.,
Yes.
which turned out to be quite a bit more than what you had originally thought.
Oh, yes.
What set the scene for us? When you arrived, was it just a setting like this, some comfy chairs and coffee?
No.
What was the interview like?
He tells us to meet us at a high school, and so we went to the wrong high school, then we got to the right high school, and he says, meet me at the Hogan. And I'd already known a Hogan is the female tribal hut. It's a mud and wood hut that the female side, and it's not all for females, but the female side of the ceremonies. They have male side of ceremonies and female side of the ceremonies. And sometimes the males participate in the Hogan. And so he takes us into we see this Hogan, and it's legit. This is the real deal. This isn't, some Quonset hut thing. It's, mud, cedar, just a hole in the center for light. And we go in, and I mean, he's already had a fire lit. You smell all this cedar around you. It's already warm inside. When, we come in from 32 degrees, and we walk in, and it's warm inside. I mean, you don't have to wear a coat or anything. So it was very inviting, and he starts right off the get-go, starts telling the stories. And when the stories start, it's very much what you'd read in the books. Very kind of, Native American, politically correct, giving the stories of a giant as a representation of addiction. It's what you would pick up at any book. Mm-hmm. But I'd spoken with him a couple of times over the phone, and I think when we met, and he saw my sincerity of, I'd done enough digging into his information, into the tribal information, that I knew the stories. I knew some of the information. I knew the parallels between them. And
not just those stories, but the stories and the biblical accounts that relate to what you mentioned earlier about the flood, the giants who came, the beings who came down and landed on the mountain and things like that.
Yeah, and at one point in time, it was about the third Native American story or oral tradition that completely paralleled the Bible, and I said, the flood, just before he was about to finish it. And he looked over at me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, you're finally starting to learn. You're finally starting to learn. And he said it in such a way I was almost waiting for him to say, grasshopper. But that is where there was a big change in our discussion and the stories he was telling. And there was a second turning point where Tom had asked him about the Sipapu in the Kivas. And you saw him look up at Tom, and he paused.
Now, the Sipapu are what?
A Sipapu is...
And I guess we should back up and describe what a Kiva is as well.
Yeah, we'd have to back up to the Kiva. So if we back up to the Kiva, it's another ceremonial gathering place. And they'll say gathering place, but archaeologists, when they went in the Kivas and they excavated them, they didn't find, just hangout kind of stuff. There were ceremonial knives, there were ceremonial ladles and or spoons, and then that brings us to the Sipapu, where they would have a fire, and then just above in front of the fire there would be a shaman. And the shaman is who would be conducting the ceremony, and the Sipapu is a small hole, maybe a 3-inch hole, just off center, within the center of the Kiva. And that is where the shaman would commune with the other world. It was their portal to the other world, whether spirits were coming and going, or whether the shaman himself was going into another world. We don't exactly know that, but we do know that that was their portal into the other realm, is the Sipapu.
Okay.
And so when Tom asked about the Sipapu, I kind of looked up at him and smiled, and all the gears started going. That's when, the trust was there, the information was already there, and now we're going to spill the beans. Then he started really telling us the story, of the giants, them going into the Kiva to survive the flood. And their flood story, it is a close parallel. And they just describe it a little bit differently as the birth of the worlds. You had the blue world and the water world and their different survival. And it's coming up to their fifth world. And that is, how they are going to survive the end times. And our previous guide had spoken very explicitly about it.
Now, the fifth world Kiva that they have, has this already been constructed?
They say it's there.
Did they indicate where it was?
He was very cagey about that. In additional research, we have geographical. It's almost like you're given a map of a geological triangulation, as it would be if you're trying to find the Garden of Eden again. You need to find the right rivers, find the right mountain range, find the right canyon, and X marks the spot. That's what it's like for us. but they actually know where it is. They are having ceremonies there, and they are saying it's ready. And the whole of the Navajo Nation, the tribes will go there to survive the fifth world.
The question that comes to my mind, if you're saying tribes, it's not just the Navajo. They're talking about all the Native American tribes. How big must this thing be?
Well, if you take your Cherokee, and this is of just their registered participants, there's actually more than that. But of the people who are actually in registry as part of the nation, you have just your Cherokee is 300,000, just the Navajo is an additional 300,000. You include your Zuni, your Ute, your Pueblo, you're pushing 1 million people.
How could this have been built without the rest of us knowing about this?
I don't know. Have you ever heard of Denver, Colorado's airport?
Yeah, been there.
I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
And do understand, it's on a reservation. They have their own police. They have their places that we can go.
They are technically sovereign nations inside the United States.
That's absolutely correct.
Right.
So if they were just doing a construction project, I mean, they could probably do it without a whole lot of people noticing, unless you get on Google Earth, then it's going to be a lot harder to hide. But what I wonder is, was it already there? Is this an ancient cavern or cavern system? Or what I really wonder is, do they just go into a kiva, the same size I went to, and the Sipapu, they just walk through a door and they end up somewhere else?
Again, Sipapu being essentially a portal into another realm.
Yeah. I mean, we have different ways we could go with that, but I do not have a solid answer.
Now, Allie, on the trailer that we saw for On the Path of the Immortals, there's a clip there of you making a reference to a petroglyph of a giant six-toed footprint. What was the significance of that, and what did you take away from that as its meaning?
Well, the petroglyphs are, in so many words, they're basically a storyboard left for the people that come behind you in a certain region to see the story of those who were there before. It might indicate where there's water or what types of animals are available to be hunted. It could indicate a lot of things like that. So to look at this and see silhouettes of deer, and then right in the middle of it to have a small footprint with 5 distinct toes and a large footprint with 6 distinct toes, 12 feet up, where they had to climb to get up there and etch this into this stone. This was a story. These were messages sent to people who came through there behind them for a reason. And so anything like that is significant.
We have a reference in Scripture, of course, of the giants who opposed David in his wars against the Philistines, having 6 toes, 6 fingers in each hand. So perhaps the significance, a link in the petroglyph, the story told by the petroglyph, to the giants of the Old Testament.
They had a lot of stories about giants in their lore as well, so that's very possible. They also mentioned to us that there was a fallen reptilian entity that caused the ancient Anasazi to wander. They had lost their mind and wandered. And right in the middle of all of these etchings on this stone, here's this reptilian creature with a bulbous head. Again, something that's just very random in the middle of all these
images
that are indigenous. You would imagine to see them there. And then all of a sudden, here's this bulbous-headed reptilian creature right in the middle.
Okay.
So definitely significance to why that was placed there.
You talked about the Anasazi earlier. What was it that's so mysterious about the Anasazi, and where did they go?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
But going there, and even she had said it earlier, and you'll hear guides say this, you'll read it in text, them speaking in evacuation. But the Commonwealth appropriate answer is that they had a 100-year drought, and these people slowly left the area. When you go there and you see it, you see the structures, you learn what they left behind, you see what it was they left. It was an evacuation. This was not a slowly leaving of the area. For me, the smallest things actually become the most important things for this story. And this is true. I mean, they really left it. You go there yourself, you will see it, the guides will tell you it, it will be in the documentation. Which even the kiva, they left their ceremonial knife, they left the spoons in there. But in the homes, in the actual residences, they left corn, they left seeds of squash and melons. The biggest one for me was they left a bag of salt.
Salt?
Salt.
That's a key. That's essential.
Yeah, you get down to primitive living. Salt was
Essential.
so important. Yeah, I mean, salt, selenium. I mean, it was, you could be paid in, Roman soldiers were paid in salt. It was so valuable.
Right.
And for native tribes, when they don't have access to a desert, to an ocean, to make their own salt, we're talking, this is very important. And they left the salt. That stuff, I mean, if you're going on a trip and you got to go and you just have to leave, you're going to grab that. It wasn't grabbed, it was left. Something happened. This
And
was
happened
not,
quick.
something happened fast. This wasn't a slowly we're being starved off the land event.
And the question is something else coming? And is this why they've prepared the fifth Kiva? These are questions addressed in the new book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam's latest, and we'd like to make it available for you or to you as part of a special package. The On the Path of the Immortals package, you'll see a telephone number on your screen here in a moment. You can also go to skywatchtv.com. On the Path of the Immortals, the first two books in the series, Petrus Romanus and Exo Vaticana, along with another book that's an excellent research reference tool about the possibility of life existing outside of, off planet Earth, extraterrestrial life, What Dwells Beyond by Jeffrey Martis. Those plus a DVD, Tom Horn presentation, The Secret Vatican and Alien Antichrist Connection, and the special investigative report in which Allie and Carl took part. Total value of the package, over $120, yours for $39.95. Again, call the number on your screen or visit skywatchtv.com. Carl Olofsson, Allie Anderson, a pleasure having you here today. Really look forward to seeing the finished production. For Skywatch TV, I'm Derek Gilbert. We'd like to thank you for joining us for the special 5-part investigative report based on the forthcoming book by Tom Horn and Chris Putnam, On the Path of the Immortals. This is the kind of thing that we hope to do quite often in the future, at least 3 or 4 times a year on Skywatch TV, digging a little deeper into a specific topic and trying to bring you information that you're not finding anywhere else on the web or on television. Future projects include Inhuman the Movie, a look at the transhumanist movement and how some at the leading edge of cutting-edge science are looking at technology as the means to apotheosis, the means to immortality. We're also looking at an investigation into the book written by Donna Howell, Redeemed Unredeemable. How far does God's grace extend? Does forgiveness even extend to some of the worst and most violent people in the history of the United States? That's the kind of thing you can expect to see in the future from Skywatch TV. Keep watching. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.